The first thing I would like to ask you is where you learned the craft or art of plastering.
Yes. I grew up in Mayo, idolised my father, who was a master plasterer with a long history. He was born in 1915, served his time with men that knew what they were doing, served a proper apprenticeship, worked a lot of his life in London. And I was fascinated by him, by his moulds, by his tools. And the first time that I saw him work with the hawk and trowel, it actually looked like a magician working. All these hand movements, and I was fascinated from day one with the craft. From the first time I seen him plastering, I never wanted to do anything else in life except copy my father. And he was determined that I'd be anything except a plasterer. He sent me to boarding school and university. A complete and total waste of time and money. I failed engineering after the first year, and he finally conceded that perhaps plastering was the route for me. So I started to serve my time with him. In about 1974, I'd worked with him for 10 years previous to that, but only as a child, as a boy, picking up bits and pieces, learning bits and pieces, but I officially started to serve my time with him in 1974. I worked a year and a half or 2 years with him, and then I moved to Dublin to my uncle George, who was also a master plasterer. They had all learned at the same school, in inverted commas, because they'd never gone to school. My father came back to Ireland from London, and George travelled the world. He went to Rhodesia, South Africa, Malta, Cleveland, and settled finally in Seattle. And I served the last 2 years of my apprenticeship with George. They were as different as chalk and cheese. I learned the moulds and the mould making and the mould running primarily from my father. And I learned the American way of doing things from my Uncle George. I couldn't have had a better apprenticeship. I couldn't have had better teachers. They were both very severe, exact men. It had to be done properly. You had to learn your craft absolutely perfectly, or they would not entertain you at any level. So 4 or 5 years later, I started my own business at 20 or 21 or 22, I can't remember exactly. And the rest is history. He used to hop off me. I'd ask him a question, and he'd send me off to figure it out for myself. He wouldn't tell me how to do it. He'd say, you use your own brain. Figure that out for yourself. The best teaching ever I got in my life, anywhere.
Do you think, George, that traditional crafts are sufficiently valued by society at large? Do you think that the work of the master craftsman is valued?
I have never really thought about that. Is what I do as valuable to society as what you do, for instance, Christine? I don't see any division. I don't see any contradiction. It's not as socially acceptable to be a plasterer, that's for certain sure, which is a great shame. And at 65 years of age is saying to you, Christine, I want to work for another 30 years with my hands. I still have the same enthusiasm, I still have the same passion, I still get the same enjoyment out of working or watching another man working well with his hands, creating something where you take a bucket of water and a bag of powder and you create something beautiful out of it. And beautiful to me can be just a flat, straight wall. with 4 square angles, top and bottom, 2 sides, a window with the reveal done properly. It doesn't all have to be highly decorative, run moulds, etc., etc. It's and the way to take the stigma out of it is to have people stand up and say, I'm really pleased that I spent my life plastering. It has been hugely rewarding on a number of fronts, not least of which is the job satisfaction. That you walk out of a room, or you walk out of a house, or you walk out of an old building, and you've left something that's tangible, something that you can be proud of.
Have plasterers committed their thoughts to paper or not? Or
they're scarce. Do you see, we're that busy plastering and running businesses and I keep saying I will one day write a book. You better than anybody know, Christine, that not everybody can write a book. I will never write a book, I know that, because I don't have the skill. My skill is in plastering. Somebody else will have to write the book. Thinking outside the box, knowing your product, understanding the process and monitoring it to where you know. It's like my mother baked a cake. She baked, for a big family, she baked 2 cakes every day. She never measured anything. She never looked at a watch. I don't believe my mother had. She certainly didn't wear a watch day to day. But she put handfuls of this, pinches of that, and cups of this into a big bowl, mixed it up, divided it in 2, patted it out, kneaded it, patted it out, put it into 2 baking trays. She knew when to switch from the top oven to the bottom oven and vice versa. And she took the bread out, she tapped the bottom of it, she wrapped it in a tea towel, and she put it on a tray. She knew what she was doing. If you asked her to write down, she probably couldn't write down the process. She certainly wouldn't be able to write the recipe for you. But the bread came out perfectly every time. You need to know your craft. That's why you need to mix the material before you start. That's why you need to have that way of thinking built into you from the start. Whether it's mixing sand and lime, or whether it's applying a poultice to fine plasterwork. The mindset has to be right. The way of thinking has to be right.
what has been your experience of working with architects?
Generally good.
So is it a case of working directly from architects' designs, or is there an element of freedom for the plasterer?
Really good question, Christine. There are 2 types of architect. The architect that trusts you and the architect that does not trust you. And trust has to be earned. So I've learned by trial and error not to be forceful in my opinions, and to let the architect be the architect, to let the academic be the academic, to listen carefully to what they're trying to achieve, and then it's my job to serve him or her. We often run across a situation where the architect is unsure themselves about how to proceed. Any good book on architecture will tell you specifically to employ good tradesmen and to listen to the tradesman, because we are actually the ones that do know, because we're at it all day, every day. An architect can't know what we know, because they haven't come the route that we've come. My father wanted me to be an architect. I would have been the worst architect in Ireland, because I don't have that ability to see stuff, to put stuff together, to see the end product, to vision. I don't have the vision that an architect needs. It took me a while to recognise that that's the architect's forte, to be able to envisage the thing finished. My job is to figure out what he or she is looking for and give it to them. And a very, very famous point in Longford Cathedral, we were only working from photographs. There were parts of it that we didn't even have. So from the photograph we modelled it up in clay, made a mould, made a part, put it up for the architect's approval. Colin Redmond was the architect. He's saying, George, it doesn't look right. George, it didn't look too bad to me. But he was right. It didn't look right. There was no shadow. And we kept tweaking it and changing it till he finally said, that looks right. Let's go with that. It looks brilliant. But I can't take any credit for that. All I can tell you is that I kept working with the architect till I was able to create the vision that he had.
So are you telling me that you are the instrument of the architect?
Very much so. I'm there to serve. I'm there to do his or her bidding.
But is your experimentation not an integral part of that, of the achievement?
Very much so. And it is no less valuable than the architect's vision. Because without my expertise, experimentation, skill, craft, the architect's vision will never be anything except that, a vision. I'm the one that has to translate that into something solid that you can look at.
Longford was clearly the great achievement in terms of a grand scale project.
Yes.
Philip Gate, commuting from Lincoln through Stansted to Longford and working on those big floral bosses. I mean, you could look at those and think, oh, are they one piece? But how many pieces were there in one of those floral bosses?
The centerpieces. First of all, we'll talk about Longford for 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Built in 39 to 56, stopped for the famine, walls capped with straws, ran out of money, couldn't go any further. So we have a difference of 18 inches, something has to give. Every centrepiece is different. Every centrepiece has 6 acanthus leaves in it, except one that has 5. And unless it's pointed, there's only one person that I brought down there ever that copped that. She's my first cousin, she's George's daughter, and she's sharp as a tack, and she spotted immediately. My name that's on it, if it fails, that's for certain sure. So it's my job to find really good people, which I did. The big achievement in Longford was to do the job properly, but really importantly, not to go broke in the process. To have that business acumen that put the thing together, that came in on budget, on time, without going broke.
How large a role do you think does entrepreneurship, business acumen, management, I mean, how important is that in being successful in the plastering trade?
Hugely important, Christine. My job is to serve my customers. I need to make a fair profit to stay in business. If I'm not making a fair profit, I will go broke. And when you need my help, I won't be there to help you. So there are lots of really good tradesmen and architects, by the way, that are in business for themselves that have no business being in business. They would be far better working for somebody and let somebody with a business head run the business.
What are your thoughts, finally, on the future of traditional plastering?
If you asked me 25 years ago, I'd say it's finished. There's no hope. We have and are producing really good men. Stephen Kelly, Joe Blake. Gary Kavanagh, he worked with us before, he's back 2 or 3 years. He's here for the long haul. We have 2 or 3 non-nationals that are doing really well with us. They want to stay, they want to learn, they want to improve. I'm quietly confident. I know this, Christine, it won't be for the want of me passing on the knowledge and the experience that I've gained over the last 50 years if there's not a continuation after I'm gone.
What is that?
They're moulds, and that very simply is where we ran a mould. See, it's the thing that George taught me about thinking outside the box. We ran a mould, and then we needed to run different moulds. So rather than making a new horse, we adapted the horse that we had. We put this mould up over it, and then we ran that mould. That very simply, you throw wet plaster on the wall,
Yeah.
and you slide that on the wet plaster to give you the form, and it'll give you that form there. That looks like nothing, it's a joint rule. It's for freehand finishing miters, where the mould won't run in all the way. You have that mitered corner or mitered angle has to be done freehand. That's the old traditional stock brush for lime washing. Where I grew up, vernacular cottages, all lime washed in the spring or early summer. Again, that didn't happen by accident. Without being master plasterers, the woman of the house knew that if you lime washed it in September, you weren't giving it enough time to carbonate. If you lime washed it in April or May, you had the whole summer to carbonate, that by the time the winter came, your lime wash was secure for the year. Well, my father would have made all these. They're flukers. Before angle beads were invented, before corner beads were invented, that's how you did your splay angles, or your bull-nosed arises. Big round but that more particularly was if you have a skirt round, that'll wipe in with a coat, hospitals and places like that, you know, where you want prison cells too. You can't have any round angles in it, you can't have any sharp arises. Everything is rounded out with stuff like that.
What exactly is this used for?
Christian, it's hardwood float, but it's not just any hardwood float. It's a Burmese teak. We discovered that Burmese teak makes a great scouring float. A lot of lads are sponging lime, which is wrong. You put it on, straighten it, rub it up with a float, and then you scour it with progressively smaller floats. Burmese teak is impossible, you can't get it now. It's one of the endangered species of trees. We have enough of it and we find bits of it. Old draining boards in old country houses particularly were made of it. It was used on the decks of ships because it doesn't rot. I've been plastering for the last 2 months, full time. We're just that busy. I would 50 times prefer to be plastering than managing. But the business is that busy and that complex at the moment. But my preferred thing, even at 65, is to be like the magician that I saw 60 years ago, copying him again today.